It was used up until the 1930s, but it's so old
It's
that
so yeah.
in 1771 it's a road through which a militia will march to fight 2,500 farmers in a field down in Alamance County in a battle over taxation without representation. It takes place 5 years before the American Revolution. So this is a
Okay.
main road.
Huh.
During the Civil War, of course, troops we wouldn't have seen lots of troops through here. Maybe those who were coming up from Bentonville, maybe. But the road runs from Raleigh over to Hillsborough, and actually it's New Bern and beyond Hillsborough. But there's no real major fighting in this area of the Piedmont.
Okay.
Most of the fighting is going to be down closer to the coast,
Right.
in Fayetteville, as Sherman's army marches up from Savannah, after it marches to Atlanta, back up to North Carolina.
Okay.
Now, the three houses here are all replicas. They're not original.
Oh, okay.
In 1921, this one burned down because some vagrants who got off the railroad came in, tried to warm up, and set it on fire. The other two simply fell in on themselves. I think
Because they're
hope
so
that
old.
Yeah, well, you see the little what looks like cement chinking. You have to replace that.
Oh,
If you
okay.
don't, sooner or later stuff just falls down.
Right.
Now the question is, why did this farm die? Well, the farm died because the sons didn't return. The two sons died during the wartime. Everybody died of disease. And the son-in-law died. The son-in-law, of course, is Robert Duke.
Okay.
And they all died. And so, the worst thing that can happen to anyone's farm is for the children not to return.
Right.
Gentlemen, you can hold that. The reason we know what this place looks like is because when Sherman shows up here, a gentleman by the name of Theodore Davis, Harper's Weekly artist, is with him.
Okay.
Which we're lucky to have because Sherman did not like reporters.
Yeah.
He said reporters were spies who did their business in public, and therefore they should not be following an army around.
Right.
But he comes and he paints, he draws these pictures for us. We not only have an idea of what's on the inside, but we also have an idea of what's on the outside. Now we think the inside picture is drawn from him looking through this window. And as you can see, it's really close. Our replica is really close. Mm-hmm. We have 5 stairs instead of 3 in the picture. The wood over the staircase is vertical instead of horizontal. But otherwise, we get it pretty much right.
Right.
You can take a look back in the bedrooms. The mattresses are filled with corn husk and hay. And the reality is that this is a pretty good yeoman farmer's house. Mr. Bennett never really does very well. He's a sharecropper up until he's 40. In 1846, he buys his property with help from a friend. He also begins selling off parts of the property as soon as he gets it. He gets 300 acres. He drops it down to 189 acres by the time of the beginning of the Civil War. And only 80 acres are actually farmable. He has wheat, corn, oats that he's growing mostly. He also has sweet potatoes and what we call Irish potatoes. We call Peruvian potatoes. Where potatoes come from. But those are his crops. He never has slave labor here except to help him with his shoe business when he falls behind in his shoe orders. The deal is that he never owned slaves, so therefore he can't really do intensive rich man's farming,
right.
like tobacco. Yeah. Tobacco requires 2 plantings and then 6 weeks of exhaustive harvesting. And you just need slaves to do that for you.
Yeah.
You can't do it with a couple of kids. So he never does that. And understand that after the American Civil War, what makes this area viable is the bright leaf tobacco that comes out of Caswell County in 1839. The only 2 counties in the South to increase their wealth after the war are Caswell County and Pennsylvania County, where bright leaf tobacco has been growing for almost 30 years.
Okay.
So, and Durham becomes a city in 1869 because the bright leaf tobacco that the Union troops raid in a warehouse over here ends up bringing in lots of mail and lots of orders for the tobacco because people are like, we love this tobacco. Tobacco's the greatest thing in the world.
Right.
Any of you gentlemen smoke?
No.
No, that's good. Don't start. But bright leaf tobacco is different from other forms of tobacco because it's crisper and sweeter.
Oh, okay.
And so anybody who smokes will tell you, we've got a colleague here who smokes Korean cigarettes, which are not bright leaf tobacco, and they're horrible. Horrible, wretched things. We're going to wander across to the kitchen to give you an idea of what that is. As you notice, we've got a space between the kitchen and the house. Now, this
It's interesting.
leaf litter and stuff is not going to be here. A
Okay.
little kid would be tasked with raking all of this stuff up, digging up the grass, and making sure there's nothing that can burn between the house and the kitchen. That's because we're always frightened that the house is going to catch on fire from the kitchen.
Okay.
Down east, in the big plantations, the kitchen is so far away that the white mistress doesn't know where the kitchen is sometimes.
Oh, wow.
She has no idea where her food is being cooked. The
And-
slaves are running all of the stuff back and
Right.
forth.
So this was a much sort of smaller family-owned
Oh,
or family-operated.
This is what we call a poor man's house. He happens to have a very good poor man's house because it's got a second story, as you'll notice.
Yeah.
But really, the kitchen is going to be, this is actually a pretty good sized kitchen and a pretty good sized farm at 189 acres at the beginning of the Civil War.
Yeah.
The reality is that we have a good deal of space here for a yeoman farmer.
Yeah.
Some yeoman farmers are going to own 20 acres, and that's all they're going to be able to farm. This man has a garden out here. It's about, our demonstration garden is about 1/3, 1/8 the size of what would have been here. Now, our loom is representative of his cloth making. He was a clothes maker.
Okay.
But there is some question about whether or not he ever used a loom to make cloth. We know he had two prices for clothes which you provided the cloth and clothes in which he provided the cloth. But we're not sure if he had a loom, and more importantly, it would not have been in the kitchen. Because if the kitchen goes up, we've just lost one of the most expensive pieces of equipment on the whole farm.
Yeah.
So we're pretty sure it would have been someplace else.
Someplace else.
The only other buildings that we do not have here that we have not replicated is the barn, which would have been where the bench is out here, and we just don't know what the barn really looked like. And a dairy, a dairy house. It looked like a little outhouse. That's where we would have kept cool milk.
Oh, okay.
Now out back we have the smokehouse, and we'll go there next.
Cool.
Smokehouse is important for the Bennetts and almost anybody else here, because while the Bennetts sold chickens and sold eggs, the reality is that they were in the pork business too. Like so many people in North Carolina today. The pork business for them, they were selling hams, and they would be selling rendered pig fat, lard.
Right.
Now, the smokehouse. One day a year in the fall, we're going to butcher up our pigs that we're going to use for this year. We're going to wrap them in wax paper and salt and hang them. We're going to start a fire down here, and 4 to 7 days later of smoking, we're going to have pig for a whole year. We're going to wet down the house because we're frightened to death of fire. Fire is always a constant thing. Remember, nobody's coming out here if your house is on fire. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, in the bottom of this thing, we have all kind of junk that would not have been here in real life. I feel like that southern housewife who hasn't cleaned up her house and she's got guests over. We got a cider press. Here, if you'll look out through here, you wouldn't have seen these trees. These trees wouldn't be here. This is all second growth. It had all been crops, and then you'd have seen a couple of orchards. Apples, peaches, stuff like that. So we render juice out of that. Mr. Bennett sells alcohol. We're not sure if it's moonshine or not, but it is North Carolina. We've got a corn husker. Corn husker. You put the corn in, all whole and raw. It shoots out the husk on one side, shoots out the corn kernels on the bottom, shoots out the cob on the other. Now the cobs are very important. We feed our animals the cobs. That's a fodder cutter. We cut up the cobs. Any cob that isn't going to the outhouse is going to be chopped up, and that's what the pigs are going to eat. And Mr. Bennett is even selling fodder to other farmers because he's got so much corn.
Right.
Now, remember, in the mid-19th century, we all eat pork.
Yes.
Probably the Muslims. And we aren't eating beef yet. During the American Civil War, we began walking our cattle behind our armies to feed the armies. nobody here is a pig farmer, right?
No.
All right. Pigs get wet and they get sick, and so you can't march them anywhere. You put them on the road. When pioneers were walking across the country, and they had the pigs behind them, they tried to put them in the wagons.
Really?
Yeah, because they could not get wet. Just
wow.
can't get wet. If you've ever been to a pig farm after a bad rain, the pigs are in there sneezing. So they could do that with cattle. And after the war, all of these men hundreds of thousands of men who've been in the army had a taste for beef. So down in Texas, we have lots of wild cattle. Texas has problems with population.
Right.
And during the American Civil War, of course, all of these Texas troops go east. And so the young men don't return, and you got all this wild cattle. So people like Charles Goodnight go and round up this wild cattle, get them on the trails rolling north to the